Welcome to On Top of the Cover, is a weekly podcast by Orlove dedicated to all of you amazing people that tune in every single week, the creative visionaries, entrepreneurs, artists, makers, I like to say disruptors around the world because, well, you are basically. And we love that you tune into this show because there's so much that we try to bring to it. We try to feature inspirational stories of people contributing to the culture of music. We look at how they do it, whether it be creatively or artistically, personally, professionally. There's always different ways and different paths. And it's important that you know and feel that because you're probably on yours as well. I'm Matt Gottesman, your host and director of the Orlove brands. You can reach out to us at We Are Orlove on Instagram. You can also find me at Matt Gottesman on Instagram. We answer each and every single text, DM, reply, response. I have personally been doing it on that and any account for about 8 years, and it's community. I love you guys, and you guys test me and try me, and I answer every single time. So I appreciate you guys. Listen, we say that music is one of the biggest connectors, in the world. It's just a common bond that we have, right? And so we wanted to take it a little bit further. That's why we wanted to open up the conversations a bit. We wanted to look at the contributors and the art and missions and the business and the new ways of doing things, the new ways of creating, right? We really wanted to show unconventional ways and different paths to success. And so without further ado, we have another incredible show, and an incredible guest with a phenomenal background, and I'll try to get through all of it. Basically, I'm going to do a hype reel for him real quick because, just a phenomenal set of experiences, in which we'll talk about that too. But we're going to be diving into the psychology of the entrepreneur. Listen, I don't care if you're in music or you're in production or you're in art or you're in writing or you are in any creative type of space or really in most things that you are responsible for bringing to this life. The spirit of an entrepreneur is probably in you in some way, and you are going to have to look at things differently in order to manage and protect the very thing that you are bringing to this world. It will cause you to have to think a lot more critically. It'll cause you to have to look at yourself more internally. And it'll cause you to be a lot more observant of the world in which you are creating and all of the other external components that you are in play with. Okay, so there's a lot there, but there's beauty in that because there's a lot of growth in you. And so Jason and I are going to definitely go on a tear. When I learned he wanted to talk about the psychology of an entrepreneur, I was just like, let's do this. It's the only world I really ever know. And I've never really worked for anybody except for myself these past 20 plus years. But I worked with many brilliant people, and that's where a lot of the great experience comes from. So Jason Peterson, entrepreneur, attorney by education and trade, entrepreneur by vocation, producer, owner and CEO of GoDigital Media Group. And we're going to talk about that. And producer named as one of the top 50 indie, top 40 under 40, and top Latin power players in music by Billboard, top 40 under 40 in home entertainment by Media Play News the past 3 years, and one of the top 30 entrepreneurs under 30 by Los Angeles Business Journal. So, man, comes with some serious experiences. As I mentioned, founder, owner, and chief executive officer of GoDigital Media Group. It's a diversified multinational holding company that owns 7 operating businesses across 3 verticals in media and entertainment, music IP rights management, networks, and commerce. Smart man. Artisan repertoire. Jason has worked with has included Janet Jackson, T.I., Master P, Jason Derulo, Pitbull, Psy, and Daddy Yankee. He's produced dozens of major music videos that have won Video of the Year at the Gospel Music Awards, MTV Latin Video Music Awards, as well as Best Directorial Debut. So he doesn't know what he's doing at all. Most recently, he co-produced the video for Janet Jackson and Daddy Yankee's Made for Now. Amazing. Currently or previously has provided leadership to the following boards and committees: American Association of Independent Music, Association of Volleyball Professionals, Advisory Board to the National Professional Sports League for Beach Volleyball, City of Hope Hospital, Music, Film, and Entertainment Board, Merlin, the global collective bargaining organization for independent labels that represent 15% of the global market for recorded music, and a dozen others. It seems like World Independent Music, USC Business Cinematic Arts Program Advisory Board, the Recording Academy, just a few. And the foundation for Jason's work is a license to practice law, a Juris Doctorate from Pepperdine University, and a business degree with an emphasis in cinema television from the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business Honors Programs. And I want to state one other thing for everybody listening. This is exactly why I repeatedly say across social media and online and on my work, we are more than one thing. And we can use several mediums to bring our purpose through, such as a lawyer and a CEO and a producer and a creator. Doing all of these things allows the totality of who we are to become and contribute to the greater of others and have impact. And so, Jason, it's so awesome to have you here, man. Thank you for sharing all this background with me.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words. My head's so big now, I'm not going to walk out of here. But yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's incredible. And I'm looking forward to learning how we got to here. And that'll be the question after we do the rapid fire questions. But I think it's so important to emphasize that you didn't compartmentalize yourself into I'm this thing. And you looked at your life as a more of the strategic, like, well, I know I'm going to do some things in my life that are of, significance for me and to the world. And it's going to take several mediums to do that. And I think that it doesn't allow us to box ourselves in. So I really appreciate you doing that, whether you meant to or not.
Well, there's different parts of self, right? And
yes.
Being able to express all of that through the life cycle of our careers and our lives is a wonderful thing.
That's exactly it. Well, so, okay. So as I mentioned before the show, we do rapid fire questions at the beginning just to let the audience see where your creativity is inspired from and, and where you, kind of draw from and just, have a little bit of fun right at the beginning, do things a little bit differently. Are you ready for the rapid fire questions?
I'm ready.
All right. So the first question, if all music is gone and you could save 3 albums to only listen to for the rest of your life, what would they be?
Number 1, Metallica S&M. I went and saw the 20th anniversary concert in San Francisco a couple of years ago. That album consistently blows me away. I love all music, so my other 2 will be completely different. I grew up playing jazz, so I'm going to go Brian Culbertson, probably the Long Night Out album, although I love most of his albums. And then there was an album as a kid that meant a lot to me by Bruce Hornsby called Hot House.
Oof. Those are good choices. I do love the variety, by the way. All 3 great choices. All right. Number 2, name an influential person, living or non-living, that if you can interact with for one day, who would they be?
When you ask the question, the very first person that comes to mind is Richard Branson for a lot of reasons. But the number 1 reason is the guy seems to always have fun. Whatever he's doing, he has, either has the best PR in the world or he's legitimately euphoric all the time. He's having a great time. And he's accomplished an unbelievable number of things in different industries. And he has something like 200 companies in the umbrella, whether it's, levitating bullet trains, Virgin Orbital making rockets, Virgin Galactic going to space, or all the stuff he's done in music and movies and retail and mobile over the years. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah, he doesn't seem attached. So, or he has this, and he's not emotional about it, but he's more open, like just flow, like, hey, let's see what can come from this. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, I bet that'll lead to the next thing. And so he's not attached to this, like, taking it personal if it doesn't work. It seems more of like a kid having fun with the toy to see what it morphs into,
There's a key learning in there, and we should come back to that because I think that we're talking about entrepreneurship. That's important, not being too attached and not identifying with what you do. If it becomes your identity, you're in trouble.
Oof. I'm pin dropping that.
But we work with somebody at our company that's very close to Richard and helped him start Virgin Records here in the US and still sits on boards for Virgin companies. And when you look at Virgin, you see people who've been there for a long time and done different things, entirely different things within the business. And that also says something about the culture. And that's something we aspire to here at GoDigital. And we've had some experience like that where people have been here 15 years or they left and came back. That's happened multiple times at an executive level. And that says something about the culture.
So true. So true. Incredible. I pin dropped that. We're going to be coming back to that. I like that. If it becomes your identity, you're in trouble. That's a very solid, powerful point. Okay, question number 3. In your opinion, what's the best music-focused film for you for all time? And as I mentioned earlier, that can be fictitious. It could be a rockumentary, a documentary. It can be, kind of a contributing component to the movie, whatever, but movie is definitely a big part of it.
Well, I'm going to take the answer in a little bit different direction here. So I started my career as a movie producer. And the very first movie I made was a music-centric film called The Beat. It was a fictional narrative feature film written by Brandon Saunier that was about 2 brothers who perform together. One, they get mugged in an alley on the way home from performance. One dies, and the other has to determine if they're going to go on with music. And it got into Sundance when we were the ripe old age of 19. And that was the jumping off point for my entire career. So that film, it has a number of musical performances. The subject matter is all built around music. It was seminal in my life. So I'm going to pick The Beat.
1988, right?
That's a different Beat. This one was.
Which one was this?
2003.
Oh, 2003. I want to pull this one up. Amazing. That must have been some experience. So, and that was your start in production.
Yeah, that was my start. I grew up playing music. I guess now's a good time to give 30 seconds of background. I grew up being creative. My parents were very supportive. I remember I had Cubase and a Yamaha Clavinova piano on an early Pentium 75 when I was like, I don't know, 10, 12, 14. And I was making the most god-awful music you could imagine in this, multi-track recording program. But my parents were very supportive about it. And I played piano and saxophone, and I was in jazz band in high school. And I thought maybe I'll be a musician until one day, a guy who was a year older than me walked in, named Joseph Green. He had heard Mark Cohn's Walking in Memphis on the radio. It's a great song, right? Mm-hmm. Heavy, male vocals and piano. And he sits down at the piano and he plays and sings the whole thing. And I went, well, guess I'm not going to be a musician because I'll never be able to do that. But he might need somebody to handle his business. And then I pivoted to the visual arts, and I convinced a guy who's a very successful entrepreneur now named Sam Hodges to partner with me when we were, I think, juniors in high school. And we made our attempt at a full-length motion picture in high school. And we had to convince our principal, J.R. Richards, who was the father of the lead singer in the band Dishwalla. So he understood creativity. He was our principal, and we had to convince him to give us our own class, essentially. We got credit for making this movie. We created our own class in high school. And we made this movie, and it was like a reenactment, essentially, of Clear and Present Danger and Tom Clancy. It was also terrible, but, good for high school and a great experience. And I got in on the back of that, and good grades. I got into the University of Southern California, and they had a program that they were letting a few people in, a very small program as freshmen in the business school. And it was the business of cinema and television. So it was a joint program between the business school and the cinema school. And they call it the BCT program. And normally you go to business school, you have to get in as a junior. You do your GEDs and get in as a junior. But this particular one, if you met the requirements, then they would let you in as a freshman because it had all this extracurriculum. It's basically almost 2 degrees, film and television and business. And I got to USC and I started being a production assistant on any film that would take me, any graduate thesis type film that needed help. And I met a bunch of guys in the first couple of weeks there at school, one of which was Brandon Saunier and a couple of his roommates. And he'd written this script and he convinced a wealthy Texas oil millionaire to finance it. And that's how The Beat happened. It got me in the industry at an incredibly young age and gave me a little bit of credibility, and we were off to the races.
That's incredible. I want you to continue from there. I'll ask you this 4th rapid fire question, but I want to then from there, I want to go back to that part to today. But first, I want to ask, is there an important book or a podcast or something that's really, something that guides your creativity and your passion for things, or keeps you grounded, or keeps you constantly thinking forward and strategic, or just creative?
Well, we talked about this prior to the podcast. When people ask what I do for a living, I often say I'm an attorney by training, but an entrepreneur by vocation.
Yeah.
And I happen to do that at the intersection of media and technology. That's my zone of genius. And
Yes.
there is a method to being an entrepreneur. I'm both a creative thinker and a structured thinker.
Yes.
And there's a gentleman at Stanford named Stephen Gary Blank, who's a professor, former entrepreneur, had several exits, who has written a number of books, and he consolidated all of these into what I like to analogize as the Bible for entrepreneurs. And it's called The Startup Owner's Manual by Stephen Gary Blank. And it is soup to nuts, the process of being an entrepreneur. And there's a corollary to this called Business Model Generation, which is another book that a whole bunch of like 400 entrepreneurs involved in that consulted on this project. But they came up with a tool called a business model canvas that outlines the 9 areas of the business model. I modified it. I have 10 areas, but there's 9 or 10 areas of the business that need to be validated in order to prove you have a profitably repeatable and scalable business model. So there is a structure to being an entrepreneur, and the Startup Owner's Manual is indispensable.
Familiar with both. And I love that you said the creative and the structure. I avoided process for years earlier on. And then I realized, because when you talk about systems and processes and operations and things like that, there's more fun in the creativity. And it wasn't until I realized how much fun you can have with systems and processes because you're a creative, because you can take that same energy and be like, well, if I want to nurture the creativity and I want this to do really well, let me understand all the things that need to be put into place to honor and respect that, and to, ensure its quality, ensure its deliverability, its serviceability, it's all these other things. So, and you really, without, creativity and meets function, and I love that you bring up about just, from the background. I always say, yeah, like at the intersection of, media, internet, people, and technology, it's just this, or creativity and whatnot. And what a beautiful time that we live in with all the leverage with with media and technology. Going back to your college days, and that being like, let's just say a starting off point from there to how we got here. What was that progression like? You can give, 3-minute, 5-minute run, whatever you want, but how do we get here to GoDigital? What was those series of experiences like?
Great question. So like I said, it started out at USC, meeting this group of people. I realized very quickly that I was not the only talented creative there, right? And I had moved from the music paradigm to the audiovisual paradigm. And these were all people that wanted to be filmmakers, right? Whether they were writers, directors, you name it. And I realized at USC at that time, it's a nexus for creative people, that there were a ton of these folks, and they were very capable. And so I immediately pivoted into being the business end of things for creative people, because I have that structured thinking capability in addition to the creative mind. And so I came alongside these folks and helped them develop their creativity. I think probably not unlike what you've done in your career. So The Beat was the first big project. There were 4 of us that were essentially making the film. It was a core team, like the director plus, I guess, 5, the director plus 4 other producers. And what happened was those other producers also were filmmakers. Essentially, I was the only sort of pure play business guy, if you will. And so after The Beat, and after we got into Sundance, and I think, according to my understanding, is according to Trevor Groth, we're still the youngest filmmakers to ever have a feature film in competition there at Sundance. And maybe that's changed now, but as of a couple of years ago, I mean, we were incredibly lucky, right? It was just lightning struck. And a couple of these other guys that we made the film with were also charting their own path as creatives. A guy named Scott Spear, who's a pretty successful director, did some of the Step Up movies and a number of other things. He charted his path into the industry by way of music videos. He looked at guys like Joseph Kahn and a couple of other directors who'd come before him and said, I think this is the way that we go. So I started producing a lot of music videos in between 1 or 2 movies a year. And we did, stuff in every genre. We actually, Scott was a master scuba diver. So we were all very water centric. So we did this video, it was the kind of first significant video we did. And we actually, at this point in time, we're putting our own money into these projects just to, get the snowball going. We approached this band Switchfoot in San Diego that we had a connection to. Scott was from there, and another buddy of mine grew up with them down there, and said, "Hey guys, we want to make a music video for you. We'll pay for it. Let's pick a song off your new album and let's do something." And we made this video in the Calabasas High School pool where we submerged a green screen in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And we had, all the cameras, all the lights, all the gear, like the drum kit, we had a Broken Roads piano, all this stuff went into the water. It's all submerged on this underwater green screen. And the guys performing underwater with scuba divers with the VCs. And then we composited the band back on dry land. So we made this video where it looks like the band is performing on dry land completely weightless. Making these enormous moves with their guitars, throwing the sticks up in the air, grabbing them out of the air, and drumming and singing upside down, doing all these things. And that became a real calling card for us. And that really launched Scott's career. We spent every dime we had. So speaking of entrepreneurism, right, you have to take risks. And one of the beautiful things about this journey was that a bunch of people, 5 of us, came together and decided that we were going to pool our resources. That was really important. And when it came to doing this particular video, Scott and I spent every last penny we had, and I took out a $10,000 unsecured bank loan. And we made this video, and everybody loved it, and that got his career launched. And I started producing all these videos for him, and we created a little production company. And then I was finishing. This was all while I was in undergrad. Right? I was still going to school at USC. And we were doing videos for Sony, Columbia, EMI, Televisa at the time. There's Latin Division was our biggest customer. Epitaph. I was doing a little bit of everything. I did videos for Master P, TI, Belinda, just all kinds of different stuff. And when I got out of undergrad, so it was probably a little over a year and a half after the Sundance experience with Beat, on a whim, I took the LSAT. And I did fairly well. I literally signed up a week ahead of time. And I was like, well, I never contemplated going to law school, being a lawyer, but we had these really great attorneys on the beat. They were super high powered, clerk for the Supreme Court, been doing it a long time, some big clients, lots of experience. But the reality was, despite being great attorneys, because we were small fish, they couldn't afford to give us the time and attention that we needed. And so I thought, after having some experience, I need to understand the practical dynamics of power in our industry. I need to know how things work, which means I need to be an attorney. And so I literally walked in, took the LSAT, did fairly well, and I went to Pepperdine. And Pepperdine at that time was a really special place. Ken Starr was the dean. This was just sort of, post his Bill Clinton impeachment days. And so we had a CNN truck parked out front full time. And there were Supreme Court justices coming through every month. And you get the opportunity to sit with them, talk to them. Pepperdine is an incredible school. It's highly ranked, but in my opinion, still highly underranked because they focus on teaching, not on publishing, which is really where the rankings come from. I walked in first day, I had a section of 86 kids. And the professor in my first class knew everybody's name and something about them. It was unbelievable. And I was that jerk who sat in the back of class with 2 other guys with his laptop up working on deals instead of paying attention. And I worked full time through law school. I had, as an undergrad, in my operations management class at the USC Marshall School of Business, I had done a project where I had forecasted the paradigm shift from physical goods like CDs and DVDs to digital goods. And I was looking at MP3 players, Walkmans, and phones going, why would you carry two? This was probably 2001 timeframe.
Yeah.
And, pre-iTunes, pre-YouTube, pre-Netflix, pre all this stuff. But it was just a project, right, for business school. And I sat on it, right? We did the beat, we did all these other projects. I went to law school. And in 2003, iTunes had launched, the iPod had launched, 2005, YouTube had launched. I was seeing this stuff, I was reading about this stuff. The ideas were starting to validate the market. And I was talking to one of my partners on the beat. This is why I chose that as the film that was so important to me. His name's Ryan Seashore, and he was one of our other producers. And I shared with him this vision I had for the paradigm shift to digital consumption and digital distribution of entertainment assets. And he said, he was producing another movie at the time that he cast an artist named Master P in. And if you remember, right, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was Master P, Jay-Z, and Puffy. Those are the big three, right? And No Limit Records had like 27. I don't know if you saw the BET. They did a miniseries on No Limit Records recently, which was fantastic. And he had 27 gold and platinum albums in 1997 alone. I mean, it was unbelievable, right? So Ryan says to me, I'm making this movie. I cast Master P in it, and we were sitting around the water cooler on set the other day. And P said, I know this digital thing's happening, but I don't know what to do about it. This was in 2005. And Ryan says to him, well, you should talk to my buddy Jason. He's got some ideas. So Ryan arranged a meeting between Master P and myself at Jerry's Famous Deli in Westwood by UCLA. And I got there a little early. I'm a college kid, right? Like, not flipping out about this. Because, I didn't know Pete, but I'd seen all the media, right? And I had this preconceived notion about this, like, how enormous this guy was in the industry and in pop culture and the grill, the chains, the entourage, the cars, the excess, the over the top everything. And he walks into Jerry's Famous Deli by himself. He's a big guy. I mean, he played pro basketball, right? He's like, right. But he walks in by himself, looking like a normal dude, no entourage. Suge Knight did call him on his BlackBerry. I saw him take his BlackBerry out and said, Suge, and he turned it off. And he sat down and he listened to me talk for over 2 hours and was kind enough to give me a 5-year exclusive worldwide deal to do all his digital distribution on nothing but an idea.
Wow.
Master P is a true entrepreneur, and I would wager that he recognized something in me that reminded him a little bit of his journey. And he's a man who takes risks on people, and I am forever grateful to him for giving me my start in the music industry. I called Apple the next day. Called the guy I didn't know named Bruno Ibarra, who's still there. Last I checked. I said, you don't know me, but if you want Master P and his No Limit repertoire, you got to get it from me. And I got a deal with Apple in like 24 hours. Right time, right place. And that was the genesis of the GoDigital companies.
I love it, man. And first of all, do you mind if I ask, how old are you?
Right now, 39. Okay,
yeah. So I'm 42. So I'm relating to everything you're saying because we're at this age where we came up with AOL chat rooms, then Napster. And I remember Napster days. And I remember I started in music before I got out briefly to make a music startup, was with Virgin Records in 2000. And I remember in 2001, and I remember being in the A&R and talking about, digital is the future. I'm telling you guys, digital is the future. There's this, with Napster, they're like, sure, kid. And it wasn't their fault. It wasn't their fault. Looking back, when you look back and you go, oh, okay, change, I get it. People don't like change, technology, got it. early, adaptation, innovation, early adopters. You learn the cycles, you learn everything. But I remember being there and them saying like, no, Napster's a real issue. We're gonna, that's being taken care of. And I'm like, and I remember pulling out a CD, and I just gotten back from Spain, and I said, let me show you something. And I was able to actually extract an MP3 from there and send it to a friend through email. I said, you cannot stop this, and I highly urge that you don't. I was like, and I don't know if you've done a cost analysis. I'm 21. I was 20, I think, actually. And I'm like, I've done a cost analysis, and currently artists, get pennies on the dollar, and I get it. I'm not going to say whether or not I agree with that. I was like, you guys get whatever on the back end, and then this middle is all of this cost. I've done a cost analysis with analog versus digital. I would never disrespect analog. I love analog. I was like, but if you look at distribution numbers by digital, you would see that you would be able to give more money to the artist. You can keep more on the back end, shrink your costs, and get a higher market share of really great talent out there, because that would make you a go-to agency, if you will, because you're able to do more digitally. And it was like talking to crickets, like, right? And I was just like, so as an entrepreneur, as the start of an entrepreneurial journey at that point, I realized, I'm like, am I crazy or are they? Is it me or is it them? Because it was very much like, it wasn't well received at first. And then of course, Apple and iTunes came out and everybody was like, well, what do we do? And I'm like, I would partner with them. Well, we're really unsure about that. I'm like, I think it's time to go. and I
amazing story.
Yeah, well, and again, I take nothing away from the A&R there or any of that stuff, and they would never remember it, of course, and it's fine, because I was for them, I was a newbie, I was a new kid, I was there to learn, I was there to kind of just absorb.
Ideas can come from anywhere. We try and foster that culture in our company. We say innovation can come from anywhere. I don't care if you're at the bottom or the top, doesn't matter. You have a voice and it should be heard.
And you're so 100% right there that I stay close to these Gen Z geniuses. I love blockchain, crypto, Web3. Like, I'm so far in it since 2016, 2017 that, like, so hanging out with these guys and these brains and tech and finance and what's going on there is phenomenal. And they love to be heard, because they're like, why are you listening to me? I'm like, you have an idea, tell me. Like, tell me, talk to me. It's all good. And I have distribution in the millions. So if you need help with anything, like, you tell me. But so I love that, you saw it very early on. That's where I was just relating to you, is because we're in that age category that we were there as things were launching, right? So you can imagine, if you know how the innovation curve works, when things launch, not everybody's ready to be like, let me dive in, but you were fortunate enough to have the passion and then have that connection with people who brought others who were ready to dive right in. A lot of kudos to you for that, because it's not always easy when the world has this hard time. Like, what do you mean email will be big? No, it won't. I'm still sending my mail, and I'm like, okay, just like what they talk about with, today's stuff, right?
I appreciate that. And I think you're making a really, really important point that I want to highlight for a second. Everything is a life cycle.
Yes.
Everything. People, businesses, artists, products, everything has a life cycle. And we need to be conscious of that. And I have banged my head on the wall on opportunities that I thought were great, but I didn't recognize the timing was bad.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, right, I learned the hard way. I spent millions of dollars and years having to learn the following lesson. It's better to be late, quite honestly, than it is to be too early. Because if you are too early, there is no market. And at least if you're late, it's like the other people went in the minefield first, right? And you can step over their dead body and go, okay, I missed that mine, right? I've been the guy that went first and stepped on the landmine. And and I've been through failures. This actually ties back into the identity comment from 20 minutes ago. We started a business. This has happened a few times, but I'll give you one example. So when Master P helped us get in the music industry, we quickly realized, well, we're not going to scale this business into, potentially thousands, hundreds of thousands of digital assets, right? Sound recordings, which embody music compositions, maybe video, going to dozens to hundreds of different endpoints out in the world, right? Different platforms that make use of the content. And there's rights and media involved. We're not going to scale that with people and spreadsheets, because all these guys over here that need the content, they all have different requirements. There's no standards. And so, we're like transforming the master content into these specialized packages that, Yahoo needed, and Apple needed, and everybody else needed. And it's incredibly challenging. And so we became a technology company overnight, and we started building a system called Content Bridge, which at the time turned out to be the world's first cloud-based digital supply chain automation and orchestration platform. We literally built our own private cloud in a data center in downtown LA before public cloud was a thing. And we were doing digital asset management and rights management and transcoding and electronic delivery of media assets all over the world. And I thought, this is going to be great. Let's make a business out of this. Right. And it became the nomenclature became encoding house. That was the type of business that this became. And the reality was, it didn't matter how hard we pushed on that, even though we were the very first in the market, and arguably the best for a long time, it was a small and shrinking market. We were really, really early. People didn't know what to make of this. And when the market did start to arrive, because everything's digital and there's not a lot of incremental or marginal costs associated with it, the folks that did try to come in and compete early, we all were competing on price, basically. And, I probably spent 3 or 4 years working really hard on this, just to realize that it didn't matter how well we executed. We could flawlessly execute, it was never going to be a good business, because it was a sub $100 million market in its entirety in the United States. So I always tell entrepreneurs that timing is everything. And you always want to be in large and fast growing markets. And I define large as $10 billion or more. Otherwise, it's hard.
I love that line. It's better to be late than to be too early. It hits very hard because it's there's a lot more convincing when you're early, very early, which I've also learned, I'm not here to convince anybody. We have to lead by execution of activities that, help define this newly found innovation or whatever it might be. But as I got older, I stopped having to be the first to go crazy, like, ooh, I love that. Let's do this. And now, I remember I first started looking at NFTs last year, a good example. And I was like, wow, I get it. Oh, I get it. Like if the world really understood what was about to happen, the rest of the world would be on it way faster than they are. Okay. Doesn't mean jump right away. So then as others started doing things, you can see the art side, and then you can start to see the utility side. And then, somebody had said to me, they're like, I'm surprised you're not in it faster. And I said, I'm used to going first. I think I'd like to watch and observe good people do it and how they do it, and all the different avenues of which you can do it. It's very early. And I think that it's nice to embrace the process of, when you're early, observe, observe a little bit. And to your point about like, where are the landmines? Where are the hiccups? What's happening? And it's been interesting watching in all the different communities of like between drops and between different things and utility build out and technology build out and all of the different things. And of course, I always tell people, I'm like, now, of course, you can't fully know unless you actually build. You can't really fully get your answers unless you actually execute. That's just life. That's entrepreneurship. But you can definitely take some time, a good 3, 6, 7, 8 months, whatever you might need, depending on how fast you want to go, to kind of just see the the process, if you will, and the interaction with the market. So it's been nice to be on the consumer side of it as an observing entrepreneur, right? So then now we know where our entrance is, or in the projects that, people talk about, and they're like, oh, we'd love you involved or whatever, maybe it's like, oh, well, we'll see. And you like to see how it comes together and whatnot. But you're right, because I can tell you the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars spent over the years of when you're very, very first. And I had to learn that by doing a music startup starting in 2002. Remember what HTML was like then? I mean, now what we have for coding language is ridiculous. Yeah, I learned a thing or two about swimming upstream versus downstream. So I love that you bring that up. And then it also allows you to position differently, like you were mentioning, even with cost. I know that sometimes there's that itch, right? That like shiny object syndrome, right? Something new comes out and people want, especially entrepreneurs, they want to chase it. I'm like, whoa, why? Why do you want to chase it? Do you really need it yet? Or is it complementary? Can it be worked in? If not, do you want to give it just a little breathing room, like a wine? Just like what's it going to do? Learning that patience is really what I think has come with age,
Well,
as well.
that plays into the identity piece, right? Like
Yes, please.
With Content Bridge, we were first to market. There wasn't really a market to speak of.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing the market development work. It's really hard, especially if you're a small company. I mean, if you're an enormous company, then perhaps, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we were a small company, and I got my identity wrapped up in making this venture successful, right? At the time, I couldn't differentiate in a healthy way between my own personal sense of self-worth and the success or failure of the business. And so I knew it wasn't working. Technology worked great. I mean, we got the biggest studio in the world to adopt it and ran their movie business, but that still didn't make it a great business. And, you got one customer that's good, right? And so I went around banging my head on the wall, trying to develop this market, trying to make this business work, because I felt like if the business failed, I'm a failure. And it was the timing was too early, and it was a bad market. It was a small market, right? Like the factors were not there to make it successful. Yet I could not let it go because I felt like if it didn't work, I was a failure. And that is one of the most important lessons that we as entrepreneurs need to learn. Is we need to be able to have a healthy level of separation between our own personal self-worth. As a human being, we have value. And it's intrinsic. It's not tied to whether or not any particular project is successful or not. Yeah, we should give it our best effort. But if it doesn't work for whatever reason, because we were too early, there was no market, ultimately the market was small and shrinking, that doesn't mean that I'm a failure as a person. That doesn't mean that I have no self-worth. So that's a really important lesson for other entrepreneurs.
Mm. How have you been able to let go? Was it a practice? Was it something from the very beginning you just said, F it, that's it? Like, all right, we're letting it go? Or how did you learn that early on? Because that's a tough one for a lot of people. I know you want to see something succeed, but at the same time, you have to also know when it might be time, like, oh, I need to remove myself from this and keep going elsewhere. That takes some practice. How did you learn that early on?
Well, to your point earlier, time is scarce, right? So it's the only resource that is truly scarce, right? And so if we want to be the highest and best versions of ourselves and experience the most this life has to offer, we need to maximize how we use time. And when I was doing Content Bridge, I didn't understand all of these concepts. Obviously, that's why I spent years, sort of banging my head on the wall. But I went through an experience, and we all have our own personal journey. I got married and divorced. And through that journey, which I now view in hindsight as something that was necessary for me to go through, it was a real growth experience, I started to go to therapy. And I recommend that everybody go to therapy. It's just making time to work on yourself. And especially if you're an entrepreneur, because the number one thing that keeps entrepreneurs from being successful is not any of the things you'll see on lists, right? If you go to a bank, or the Small Business Administration, say, what's the number one reason small businesses fail? And they'll say they're undercapitalized. Or they'll say, the market's too small. That's not the answer. The number one thing, the number one reason why entrepreneurs fail is because they don't have the psychology required to be successful. They live in a fear paradigm.
Yes.
And I was living in a fear paradigm, right? I was afraid of what failure would mean for my identity, my self-worth. And so on the back of my divorce experience, I started going to therapy, making time for myself. And I was fortunate enough to meet some of the world's foremost experts at working with trauma. And so I started my own self journey here, trying to identify the traumas that I had been through, being married and divorced being one of them. And I started metabolizing those traumas. And so here's what happens when we're all, 100% of people on this planet have experienced trauma in some way, shape, or form. The basic definition of trauma is a perceived loss of control. We've all experienced it. And, big and small, all the time. It's an ongoing thing. And what happens is that the body has a memory, has a non-visual memory of these traumatic experiences. And it builds up over time. It creates a total load. And so in the present, something could happen that we sense, could be a smell, a sound, a conversation, whatever the thing is, that triggers an emotional response. And as human beings, we are hardwired to make decisions and act based on how we feel. I challenge anybody listening to this to think about, have they ever acted against how they felt for any significant period of time? It's really hard. Right? And so what happens is we are all in essentially, we have patterns of behavior in our lives that are built on how we feel. And if we're in a fear-based paradigm, right? If we have anxiety, depression, fear, we fall into fear-based holding patterns in our lives. We get stuck in a certain place and a certain behavioral pattern because we're afraid of a negative outcome. And so the number one reason entrepreneurs fail to be successful is that they're living in a fear-based paradigm. And so my platform as an entrepreneur has become fear has no place in an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial business. We do everything we can in our business to create leadership development programs that are not like the traditional Jack Welch GE work in every department type program. It's we're going to send you to therapy. You have the opportunity to go to therapy, to work on being the highest and best version of yourself, to metabolize whatever traumas you've experienced, so that and what happens is you move into a feeling state of well-being where you can be rational. And in being rational, you can make the best decision for the outcome that you're looking for and not be colored by all of these emotions that would otherwise drive you into a fear-based protection paradigm.
I love that you bring all of that up, because if we're not careful, and that's what's happening, not just in entrepreneurship, but I mean, in everything, as we're seeing even in the macro these days, is if we do not understand our emotions, they will lead us, and they may not lead us well. And in entrepreneurship, when you say that, there cannot be fear, I want to iterate to the audience that yes, it exists, but we must lean in and deal with it. We don't have the luxury of letting it own us. I don't have that luxury of time, and I don't have that luxury of life for that. So people ask, like, do you ever have your moments? I said, of course, I wouldn't be a soul having a human experience if I didn't. I was like, but it's an experience to teach me right in that minute, what do I need to deal with? So if there's a fear that comes up, what is that even tied to? Was that a past experience, or is that something that I have not actually let go in a moment that it was supposed to be? Or am I creating some sort of an expectation or an outcome? And then the other thing that I had to learn was this idea of self-reliance, where, people, and I love bringing this up because this young entrepreneur, she asked me a question last year, and she said, people always surprise me. And I said, they never surprise me. And she said, but they're always doing unpredictable things. I said, yeah, that never surprises me. And, and she said, what do you mean? I said, see, you're surprised by their unpredictable behavior. I'm expecting it. And so when you expect it, you realize that at any given point in time, another person can make some sort of a decision that can affect you if you are putting too much emphasis on their behavior or their choices. And so we must constantly be learning about ourselves, learning about any fears, learning about our emotions, and solidifying our own core and be very self-reliant that the choices we make can do its best to protect or be ready for anything that may come its way that is unpredictable. I think that deals with the uncertainty. I think that that's where a lot of people struggle, right? Is uncertainty.
That's the key right there.
Right?
Entrepreneurs have to be comfortable with uncertainty, and you can only be comfortable with uncertainty if you feel confident and comfortable crossing each bridge when you get to it.
That's it. So, what we're witnessing in mass, even with people as of, last year and a half is, it's like, oh, why do you seem much more relaxed about everything? And I said, well, first of all, I'm like, I'm observant. I was like, but from an entrepreneurial perspective, I'm like, my highs and lows have been going on for years, and you adapt and you get flexible and you learn how to become self-reliant, critical thinking, and to deal with uncertainty, which you begin to realize, oh, anxiety just comes from maybe you not dealing with something yet. And what happens when we deal with something? Doesn't it kind of just start to go away? Like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I don't have time. I don't this. And then they give themselves like one day and they jump into it and they start like weaving and sewing and mixing around with it. And, they get it and they go, this isn't so bad. I'm like, you feel a little calmer, don't you? Because you're dealing with it. You're just dealing with it, right? Versus adding the fire and the fear and the narrative or like whatever that I once read in The Time Warrior. It was a great book. I'll never forget this. And said that when we put things off that we need to do, we tend to build up in our head all of the activities we think that we need to do with it if we don't know how to do it yet. So we're like, oh, I'll get to it like next Wednesday. You know what? That task, I'll get to it next month. I'll get because I know there's gonna be a lot involved, or I'll get to it. And great quick story is that I remember for a podcast once, I had to get it ready for Google Play. It took me 6 months to finally get around to it because there was like some coding and some things that you had to do with the podcast and all this stuff. I asked the producer one day, I said, that's it. I want to learn how to get this up on Google Play. He goes, great. You want to come in early like next week? I was like, yeah, what day? We're going back and forth for 5-10 minutes. I'm like, hey, what do we have to do? Pick a day. And he goes, how about next Wednesday at 2? I'm like, perfect. I'll see you then. I'm walking out. I turn around. I say, out of curiosity, what does it take? He goes, hang on a second. Google. Hang on. Copy. Paste. It's submitted. I'm like, it's submitted? He goes, yeah. I'm like, that was 6 months and 5 days and 3 hours later that I like, and all you did was copy paste. He's like, yeah, and we laughed. And I'm like, that damn book, like we build up in our head and we don't know. Uncertainty can pause decades if we're not careful, right?
Yeah, and it causes behavioral patterns. I remember. Right. So my big issue, we're never 100% healed, but my big issue historically has been fear of abandonment, rejection, and that goes all the way back to pre-memory, right? I know that certain therapy modalities essentially work you through forgiving your parents. I had an absolutely wonderful home life. I mean, my parents did everything they possibly could to create a stable environment. People were good, bad things didn't happen. It's not like I had any, enormous traumas in my childhood, which partly, is probably why I'm an entrepreneur today, because I do feel relatively secure in an uncertain environment. But there were certain things that happened that created a fear of abandonment or rejection. And they kind of came from both ends. I think there were some pre-memory things that happened. There was an earthquake and I was maybe in my crib and nobody came and I thought I was going to die, that kind of thing. And like on the other end, I was given more than my share of God-given talents. And so I was always the best at whatever the thing was in school, whether it was running multiplication tables or like in the fourth grade, we had to read, I think it was 12 books and write book reports, right? Well, I wrote 118 novels in fourth grade. I was the best artist. I always did chalk drawings and send me to do them with the professionals at the various festivals. I was good at everything, and I got a lot of positive feedback. And the actual downside of what would otherwise be an incredible thing was I started to believe that if I wasn't the best at everything, I was a failure and people wouldn't love me. And so anything that I couldn't be the best at, I would just quit. Like after Joe Green came in and played Walking in Memphis, I went, that's absolutely incredible. And that was the last day I played music.
Wow.
Which is kind of sad when you think about it, right?
Oof.
And
man, I relate to you. Just you got me thinking about my whole history. Go on.
And so what happened was, I fell into this behavioral pattern, right, of not doing anything because I loved it, doing it because I thought I had to be the best at it so people would love me. And that fear of abandonment drove all of my decision making, all my behavioral patterns for like the first 30 years of my life. And it wasn't until I made the time and did the work to metabolize that things started to change. And the point I want to make is that back to we make decisions based on how we feel, and our behavior patterns are built entirely around how we feel. I hadn't read a book on my own as an adult ever. I'd read, trade journals and stuff like that, but like read a novel, right? Sat down and spent 6 hours reading a novel or whatever. Because sitting there by myself reading a novel made me feel lonely, and lonely felt like abandoned. And then I did the work, and I went to Aruba on a scuba diving trip with a buddy of mine. He left a day early. I was there on a Friday night by myself in the hotel instead of going out and socializing. I'm very extroverted. I stayed in and I read a book. I read a novel. And when I finished the novel, I went, holy shit. That was the first book I've read in 20 years. And I didn't even realize it. Just sounded like a fun thing to do. And so what happened was the feeling state shifted and the behavioral paradigm naturally followed, and I didn't even realize it until after the fact.
Mm. That's powerful. I can relate to a lot of what you were saying, from childhood parents who were incredible to chasing after things that I thought by being the best in them would bring me worthiness, right? That I would prove myself. And then a divorce for me at 33, 34, after 8 years is what caused me to do that next level of work where I realized, this is about me in some capacity, well, in all capacity. And I remember people saying like, wow, you're really taking this, like, I feel like you're blaming yourself for the whole thing. I'm like, not at all. I was like, we both have our things. I'm like, but I'm no longer responsible for her, but I am definitely responsible for how I ended up in this situation, and who I am. And if I'm to be, who am I as the man of where I'm heading? I need to know that man is. And so, yeah, when you begin to do that level of work and sit with yourself and read, I remember I hadn't really read as an adult at like past college, and we don't really count that, right? I just started diving into everything, and more importantly, integrating what I was reading, practicing it, because I know we can get stuck if we read it and then like need more reading. It's like, no, let me try that. But you're right. It's fascinating to learn how our emotions are dictating us to the outside world, but are we nurturing enough of our inside world? And becoming a better entrepreneur and a better leader is all about the inside journey. Because, and I noticed the conversations that I would have in business, I mean, literally like somebody could be projecting like crazy or they get really upset. I'm like, what do you need? Let's talk about how to get you support. What is it like you want in this particular situation? Because we're good. Everything here is lined up. We got everything here. What are you missing? What do you need? What do you need support on? What do you think are the priorities that are of most concern to you? Because you realize like, oh wow, internally you're having a struggle with something that has nothing related to me. I'm just happen to be the person that you want to throw it all out on. So you start to learn all of these cool little nuances in business that the moment somebody's mad or upset, I don't mean to smile out of condescension, but I mean, I just sometimes look at them like, what's going on? Let's just talk for a second. And when you create that space, it's actually very interesting because you set up a whole new place of trust where they're like, wow, thank you. And I'm like, go, it's okay. Let's talk about that. So it's interesting in negotiation how you can kind of see, hey, we both can win. That's going to be okay too. And if we don't, and if we both can't win, I'm okay. You can go that way and I'll go that way. And, we can still be like cool acquaintances and see how each other are doing. Like, I would never take any offense, stop taking things personally,
I love your point, though. I love your point. I in my experience, as my career and life cycle has progressed, I've moved from being in the trenches, making the content, to which, I nowadays all creativity in a way to building Lego blocks, right? You've got different pieces and you
Right.
put them together to make something new. And, I've moved from doing that at like on a single recording level to doing that now with businesses and capital markets. But what I've learned along the way, and this is what I'm relating to what you're saying, is that as an entrepreneur, we go through different parts of our business's life cycle. And in those different parts of the business's life cycle and the market's life cycle, we need different types of partners, different people, different expertise. And one of those types of partners, of course, are financial partners. And there are different types of financial partners based on where we are in the business's life cycle. But more than anything, investors bet on people. And of course, they're going to look at the market and they're going to look at product market fit. All that's just part of life cycle, right? And it's the people that move it along, move the project along its life cycle. So investors bet on people. And I'm bringing this back to what you just said, which I think was so brilliant, is that entrepreneurship is really an inward journey. If I'm an investor and I'm betting on somebody, I certainly hope that they've done the inward work to be a well-balanced entrepreneur.
A really good, close friend of mine of 20 years, an investor who came into, a very interesting journey, but we'll leave it at that out of respect. And he asked me the other day, because he's invested, several times and some turned out really well. But he said to me the other day, he goes, how do you know in business? Like, how have you figured it out? Like, how do you know the trust and that, they're not this and they're not that? And I said, listen, you can easily find someone that you can execute so well with complementary skill sets all day long. He goes, oh yeah, absolutely. I'm like, right? Don't use that as the only reason that you guys decide to do something. Take a moment to date a little bit. Like, watch their character. How are they treating their family? Where are their values at? What's the integrity like? Observe. Just take a little extra time to observe. Observe without judgment, because, you may, first of all, know two people are the same, but you may find that, there's some things in there that can be compromised in a way that may not suit your values. And that is an important thing, because when it comes to the most important decisions in the business later on, things can always be cruising. But the moment that the most important decisions that come later on, if there's not mechanisms in place that are of the highest ethical, structure, especially in an agreement. I once had a very prominent real estate mogul friend of mine say, he's like, Matt, what makes good friends great? I said, what? He goes, contracts. He said, I told my father that when he was alive, and he's like, 100%. He's like, what do I always tell you? So, I was like, you have to observe the character of another. I'm like, it's what investors do in general with people. They choose people with really good character. They hope for very good character, but if you observe enough, I think you can kind of see how they behave, and that you can mold and be flexible and shape and work and pivot and no ego and have fun and build and try things and make changes real fast and not hold on to things and not be attached. And it's a marriage. So treat it like one.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When you're building your team, it's like a marriage. You need value alignment and, most importantly, integrity. A good friend of mine who is also an entrepreneur that I look up to, he said this to me the other day. I really liked it, so I'm going to repeat it. He said, there's two kinds of people in business. There are missionaries and mercenaries.
Mm.
You want to work with the missionaries.
Amen. Thank you. I'll put that on my wall with your quote. I'll put you and his name. I'll make sure to text you to get the.
Yeah, with that, we should probably wrap up.
Absolutely.
I was having so much fun. I realized we're way
I
past
know.
11 o'clock and I'm way over my next.
No, yeah, absolutely. We made it to an hour 7. This was incredible. Where can everybody find you online, find the company, just all the digital, all the assets, everything?
Sure. I mean, you can come to our website. It's GoDigital.com, GoDigital.com. You can find me on Instagram at USC Jason Peterson. You can look me up on LinkedIn at LinkedIn/Jason Pet, JASONPET.
Amazing. Everybody listening to this will all be in the show notes. So you guys will be able to find this. We're going to have the timestamps. It's just so you guys are aware. Jason, this was an incredible conversation. I told you in the email, I think earlier this week, I don't know if you got to see that, but I was just saying that I can talk about this stuff like all day long. Entrepreneurship and emotional intelligence is like, I mean, it's a crash course in personal growth, really.
You could have given the entire talk. I'm really impressed. Thank you for doing this.
You have an incredible background, and I look forward to continuously connecting with you and sharing your story with everybody. And I'll have them, hopefully reach out. GoDigital.com on Insta, USC Jason Peterson, LinkedIn. They can also find you there too. And they can probably link to everything else at GoDigital if they have any questions. Thank you so much for coming on. If you can hang on just for 1 second. For everybody tuning in, really, truly appreciate you guys doing so. Please support Jason and GoDigital, doing amazing things. Most importantly, you're probably going to get a wealth of information. So do yourself a favor before maybe navigating some of these waters. I'm sure there's a lot that you can learn from him and any one of the companies. You guys, it means a lot to us and this movement and contribution to the music culture, if you will. Please continue to keep giving us 5-star reviews on Apple. It does help expand our show, so we're very grateful for that. You can follow us on all major platforms at We Are Orlove and myself at Matt Gottesman, MattGottesman, at We Are Orlove, WeAreOrlove, We Are Orlove. Also, if you are listening to this on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Google Play, any one of the 30, 40 platforms, you can actually watch this on YouTube, our YouTube channel, Orlove YouTube channel. Please subscribe there. Show notes will be there. You can comment. We answer the comments there as well, too. We're on it everywhere because it's community. We really, really appreciate you guys. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we're out.